Something is breaking behind the scenes. Religion, nukes, NATO, Israel, even global travel, and these 6 headlines might be the only warning we're getting. Welcome to Zenith Global News, your trusted window to the world. From across the world, these are today's top stories. The Holy War. Trump just called the Pope terrible for religion, and now the GOP is being forced to choose between their president and their God. The nuclear heist. Forget the treaty. Trump is literally planning to steal Iran's uranium with a fleet of excavators and bring the nuclear dust to American soil. The TCS scandal. A corporate executive on the run for forced conversions. Is TCS hiding a radical religious underground, or is Nida Khan's husband setting her up? The NATO betrayal. Europe is officially defying the White House, sending a rogue naval force into the Strait because they think Trump's peace deal is a lie. The sky is falling. Airports are turning into ghost towns as jet fuel vanishes. This isn't a suspension. It's the total collapse of global travel as we know it. The Israel gag order. Trump just muzzled the Israeli military in all caps, effectively choosing Lebanon over Netanyahu. Has the U.S. just switched sides? Now, let's dive into the details of today's biggest stories.
Trump's dispute with Pope Leo deepens divisions on the right. The Republican Party is facing a new kind of civil war, and the fault line runs straight through the Vatican. What began as a foreign policy disagreement has spiraled into an extraordinary public feud between President Trump and Pope Leo XIV, deepening divisions within the GOP just as the midterm elections loom. The friction started over the war in Iran. Pope Leo, a Chicago native, has become a vocal critic of the administration's military involvement. President Trump fired back on Truth Social, calling the pontiff terrible for foreign policy and weak on crime. But the fallout isn't just political, it's personal for the conservative media elite. On Fox News, Sean Hannity questioned if the Pope had even read the Bible, accusing him of twisting religion to attack the president. That sparked a sharp rebuke from Tucker Carlson, who called the Pope's stance conventional and mocked Hannity's cable news mentality. And the president isn't backing down. On Friday, he suggested he might start ranking conservative figures on a list of good, bad, and somewhere in the middle. Inside the Beltway, the GOP is scrambling. While Speaker Mike Johnson and Vice President J.D. Vance have signaled total loyalty to Trump, vulnerable Republicans like Senator Susan Collins and Representative Brian Fitzpatrick have condemned the rhetoric as offensive. Single quote, "With fuel costs rising and Catholic voters proving a key demographic, many in the party fear this Vatican vendetta could be a self-inflicted wound." As former Governor Chris Christie put it, American Catholics may not always agree with the Pope, but they remain loyal to him. Trump says we'll bring Iran uranium back home to U.S., Tehran. Look, if you thought diplomacy was all about fancy pens and silk ties in Geneva, you haven't been paying attention to the new excavator doctrine. President Trump stood up in Phoenix yesterday and basically traded the negotiating table for a Caterpillar showroom. He's telling the world that this peace deal with Tehran isn't going to be written on parchment, it's going to be dug out of the ground. He's calling it nuclear dust. Whether he means the high-grade enriched uranium sitting in those centrifuges or the literal rubble from our June airstrikes, the message is the same. He wants it moved. And he doesn't want it moved by inspectors in lab coats. He wants the biggest excavators you can imagine. He's talking about a joint venture demolition crew. And Iranian workers, side by side, shoveling the nuclear program into crates and shipping it back to the States. Now, Tehran? They're not exactly putting on their hard hats yet. Their foreign ministry says the stockpile isn't moving an inch. It's a classic standoff. You've got the president treating a nuclear disarmament like a real estate development in Queens, and the Iranians acting like the stubborn tenant who won't vacate the building. With the ceasefire clock ticking toward Wednesday, it's a hell of a gamble. Either we're about to see the most literal, groundbreaking deal in history, or we're just digging a deeper hole. Iran rejects Trump claim on deal to surrender nuclear material. President Trump was out in Phoenix yesterday, and he wasn't talking about treaties or protocols. He was talking about horsepower. He's telling the world that if we're going to settle this thing with Iran, we aren't sending in diplomats with briefcases, we're sending in a fleet of the biggest excavators you can imagine. He's got this vision, American and Iranian crews, side by side, digging up what he calls nuclear dust, that enriched uranium, and hauling it out of those mountain sites like it's just another load of contaminated soil. He wants it crated up, loaded onto ships, and brought back home to the USA. It's the first time in history a nuclear disarmament plan sounds like a high-stakes demolition job in Midtown Manhattan. But here's the problem. The guys across the fence aren't wearing our hard hats. Tehran shot back this morning, basically telling the president to park the machinery. They're saying that nuclear dust isn't going anywhere and that they haven't even agreed to let a shovel hit the dirt yet. To them, this isn't a construction site, it's a sovereign fortress. So you've got Trump measuring the square footage for the move, while Iran is still arguing over who owns the land. We've got a ceasefire expiring Wednesday, and right now the only thing being built is a bigger wall of misunderstanding. TCS's conversion accused Nida Khan's husband gave cops her location. They found it locked. Nida Khan, accused of forcible religious conversion at the Nashik unit of the IT giant Tata Consultancy Services, has been on the run for the last week, with her husband changing stances on her location to the police. We're looking for Nida Khan. She was a process associate over at TCS Nashik, but now she's playing hide-and-seek with the law. She's jammed up in this conversion case, allegations of pressuring colleagues to switch faiths, while a sexual harassment scandal roils the office. Ever since her name hit the blotter, she's been on the run. Now, her husband? He's giving the cops the runaround like a foreman hiding a safety violation. First, he tells the boys in blue she's at a relative's place. The cops roll up, padlocked door, and a dial tone. Then he says an aunt moved her to Nashik. Now, he claims he's got no clue where she's clocked in. TCS is already shoring up the foundation, bringing in an oversight committee to inspect the damage. Khan's lawyer is pushing for bail, saying she's expecting a child and just discussed the matter. But until she surfaces, this whole case is stuck in the mud. Macron demands assurances after Iran opens Strait of Hormuz. The dust hasn't even settled on the excavator talk, and now we've got a high-stakes standoff at sea. Yesterday, Tehran finally blinked. Foreign Minister Iraqi announced the Strait of Hormuz is completely open for commercial ships. President Trump even took a victory lap on social media, thanking Iran and declaring the situation over. But if you think the world is just taking their word for it, you haven't seen the blueprints for what's coming next. French President Emmanuel Macron and UK Prime Minister Keir Starmer aren't ready to pack up the hard hats. They just hosted a 50-nation summit in Paris, and their message was clear. Words are cheap, but security is expensive. Macron is demanding firm guarantees that this isn't just a temporary window. He's calling for a neutral, strictly defensive maritime force to escort tankers and clear mines. Macron's calling it the Freedom of Navigation Initiative. He wants a mission entirely separate from the belligerents, meaning he's looking for a way to secure the oil flow without getting stuck between Trump's blockade and Iran's Revolutionary Guard. The president, meanwhile, is telling NATO and the allies to stay away unless they're just there to load up on oil. So you've got Trump claiming the job is done, Iran saying the gate is open, and Europe moving in with their own security detail because they don't trust the foundation. It's a fragile peace, and the tide could turn by Wednesday. Keep your eyes on the horizon. This site is still hot. Air Canada temporarily suspends some flights to New York and other locations. The war in Iran might be in a fragile ceasefire, but the bill is finally coming due for the airlines. Air Canada just announced they're pulling the plug on several routes starting June 1st, suspending flights from Toronto and Montreal to JFK. They're straight up saying these routes aren't economically feasible anymore. When jet fuel prices double in a few weeks, the math just doesn't work. But Air Canada isn't the only one feeling the heat. Over at Spirit Airlines, the situation is looking like a total structural failure. Reports are coming in that they're begging the feds for hundreds of millions in emergency funding just to keep the birds in the air. Europe is even worse off. The International Energy Agency is warning they've only got 6 weeks of jet fuel reserves left before the tank hits empty. From Qantas in Australia to EasyJet in the UK, everyone is hiking prices or cutting shifts. The president says the Strait of Hormuz is open, but for the aviation industry, the cost of doing business is still in the stratosphere. We're looking at a 1% cut in global capacity, and if those fuel prices don't stabilize, we're going to see a lot more planes parked in the hangar. Enough is enough. Trump says U.S. banned Israel from bombing Lebanon. The boss just threw a massive wrench into the gears of the Middle East, and he didn't use a soft touch. A U.S.-backed Israeli-Lebanese ceasefire took effect at 2100 GMT on Thursday, halting fighting that flared on March 2nd. President Trump just put Israel on notice. He posted on social media, all caps, naturally, that Israel is officially prohibited from bombing Lebanon. His words, "Enough is enough." He's shutting down the air raids and drawing a hard line with our closest ally to keep this new ceasefire from collapsing. But don't think he's gone soft on Tehran. Trump is making it clear that Lebanon is one job and Iran is another. He's keeping the naval blockade on Iran in full force until his nuclear deal is 100% finished. He even told NATO to stay out of the way, calling them a paper tiger and telling them to only show up if they're loading oil. Meanwhile, Netanyahu isn't exactly packing up the tools. He's keeping troops in southern Lebanon as a buffer zone, claiming there's still a rocket threat to handle. So, you've got Trump trying to force a finished project, Israel holding the line, and a blockade that isn't moving an inch. The strait might be open, but the tension on this site is higher than ever.
If you value real, balanced reporting from across the globe, make sure to like, share, and subscribe. Turn on notifications so you never miss the stories that matter. Stay informed, stay aware, stay ahead. We'll see you in the next update, only on Zenith Global News.